Hello everyone, welcome to Crystal Eclipse. My name is Jessica. In this video, we'll be asking the cards about your future spouse and their previous relationships. And this will be any previous relationships they had, how serious they were, anything that sort of went wrong, anything important that the cards might have to show us. So I have 4 stacks for you all today. Over here we have labradorite, rose quartz, lapis lazuli, and lastly adventuring. So choose whichever stack or stacks call out to you and we'll get started. You can check the description box or the comment section for timestamps if you'd like to skip directly to the stack or stacks you've chosen. Starting with our first stack and labradorite. Our first card is the 6 of Swords. Next we have the King of Wands, the Hermit, and lastly we have Milk and Honey. So starting off with this first stack over here, or with this first card over here in the 6 of Swords, we see sort of an ominous situation, one that things can just fall apart at any moment. With this boat here, although it seems like they're sailing and they're going on their journey, we do see that the swords are stabbed into the boat, implying that they're in a boat that's not very safe and not very secure. It can get holes in it at any second. If any of those swords came out of place, they would sink. The boat would sink and it wouldn't be useful anymore. So I'd say with the previous relationships, it seemed like there was always something negative to them. There was always something that they saw, this being your future spouse, they saw that there was an issue with it, but they progressed through that relationship without really trying to pay attention to it. So they knew it was there, but they kept ignoring it, or they thought that they could fix it. Like maybe they saw those holes in that boat and thought there was some way that they could fill those holes or prevent the boat from sinking, but it always led back to the same place where things would just fall apart. Maybe they would make it a little further each time in each relationship, but when it came to like the realization of how they were progressing, when it came to trying to solidify that relationship or make it something more permanent, it became quite obvious to them that things just weren't going to work out, that there was no way to just keep sort of postponing the inevitable with those previous relationships. Then we see this King of Wands card here, and we see the King of Wands in this situation sort of as a joke for somebody who's playing around and messing around. And it seems like this was their response to those previous relationships. When they saw that things were sort of falling apart, when they saw that there were issues, rather than accept them and try to deal with them, or accept them and realize that that was not the relationship they were meant to be in, they sort of played it off, or they minimized the severity of the arguments, the situations that they were in. They almost thought that if they ignored it, it would just sort of fix itself. Things would happen and somehow the remedy would come naturally. But they didn't realize that just wasn't how things were going to play out. They kept going into these negative relationships, hoping that things could be good, but then they just continued to result in that same breakup, the same, almost, it seemed like it was just repeating. Different relationships, different people, but the events kept repeating. They kept ending up in a relationship that didn't work out, and rather than focusing on the things that sort of led to that end, they just ignored them. But we see the Hermit here with some realization and actually paying attention to those issues that existed. And I would say with this is a journey that they're going through before they meet you. This is where they're at right now if you haven't met yet. They are trying to figure out what went wrong. I think they finally have some time to themselves. I think they took a break from relationships and weren't trying to start up a new one. They weren't trying to be with somebody. They finally realized they didn't need to be with people. And during that time, during this time that they're not with you, they're noticing the patterns that they ignored or sort of brushed over in the past. They're seeing that there were a lot of issues that were visible from the start with those previous relationships. They are learning from those previous relationships and the way that they were acting in them and the way that people treated them. They know what they're looking for now, and they almost in a way can build a better relationship because they finally took the time to focus on the negative in those relationships and fixing those issues, like almost playing through them again so they could see what went wrong and avoid it in the future. Well, this milk and honey card, I would say that this doesn't seem to apply to the previous relationships. I would say this applies to them where they're at now or before they meet you. They get into a better mindset and a better headspace of mentality or approach to relationships, and that's where they'll finally be able to meet you and approach you with that new look on life, a look where they're able to see flaws, they're able to see issues and embrace those issues, try to figure them out and solve the problems rather than just brushing them off like they used to, so that the relationship with you will be successful rather than having them fall apart right here. They know that, you know, sometimes they can't fill those holes. This boat might not be saved, but that was in the past. Those issues were in the past, and they can now look at a new relationship and the relationship they'll have with you and really try to focus on making a successful relationship. So I would say when it comes to these previous relationships, nothing ever seemed very serious. And I would lean more toward this King of Wands card as a representation of those previous relationships. Even though this is a king, he doesn't really seem like he's behaving like a king. So I would say that even though this future spouse of yours was in relationships, it didn't really seem like they were in true relationships. So I would say when it comes to anything thinking about the past, I would say don't worry about previous relationships. They were nothing that was ever going to progress anywhere more serious. Know though that they are evaluating their previous relationships so that they can have a better relationship with you when the time comes for you to be together. They're working very hard on the way that they handle things and the way that they accept things. And overall with this card or with this stack, I would say that there doesn't seem to be like a real big relationship or anything really important that stands out. So I would say don't worry about anything too serious, and don't worry about them thinking about the old relationships too much. There was nothing to compare to because those relationships were never great enough to sort of be remembered. So that's what I'm seeing with this first stack and Labrador. Starting with our second stack and Rose Quartz. Our first card is the Three of Swords. Next we have the Four of Swords, the Set of Pentacles, and lastly Thinker. So it's interesting. We have sort of two cards on both sides that are very similar to each other. We have very similar imagery here going, like representing the process that this person went through. With this first card here in the Three of Swords, of course this card represents heartbreak, a lot of pain, a lot of backstabbing, a lot of things that just didn't go well through relationships. And then we see the Four of Swords card where this person is just laying there with these swords dangling above them in a really dangerous situation. So I would say a combination of these two cards would represent the previous relationships where they got themselves into relationships that they got hurt from. They had a lot of difficult relationships, or they could have had very few relationships, but whatever they were just so negative, and they really stayed with them for such a long time that it really changed the way that they handled things. But I would say that some very important people in their life seem to have hurt them, and they seem to almost not trust people, or they feel like they're almost deserving of that hurt. And I would say that represented through this Four of Swords card. They started putting themselves in those situations almost as if that was the only thing that they should be in, you know, like it was going to happen anyway, so why not choose it themselves? But I would say with both of them together, these previous relationships were a lot of negativity, a lot of heartbreak, a lot of just not good examples of what a relationship should be. As they progressed through these relationships, they kept going back to them. They kept returning to relationships that were negative. These people kept hurting them. And I would say that this isn't just romantic relationships. It seems like it's like friendships and family too. It seems like just overall a lot of negativity, a lot of hardship, a lot of just people almost betraying them consistently. They saw it and they expected it, and it just kept happening. We see the Son of Pentacles here in an almost sad appearance where we feel like there's a loneliness in this card. And it seems like as these things kept repeating, as they kept getting hurt, and as they kept putting themselves in situations where they were getting hurt, they sort of lowered their own self-worth. They got sort of down. Their self-worth was almost non-existent. So they felt sort of lonely. They didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to handle the situation. And I would say, once again, through those two cards, the Son of Pentacles and the Four of Swords, it seems like they really blamed themselves for that situation rather than acknowledging that other people played a part. And I would say it seems almost more like other people were to blame more than they were. They almost seem to just trust people so much and sort of in a way be too naive to where they kept putting themselves into those situations, and people just kept taking advantage of them and their openness and their trust. But we see the final card here with Thinker, and Thinker is a card of thinking, of course, but Thinker is a card that represents a moment to yourself, a moment to evaluate all that's around you and figure out what it is in life that you're doing, what it is that you want, how to handle and embrace situations. And this is a good card to have within this stack because we see so much heartbreak and so much disappointment and loneliness and depression that by having Thinker here, we're seeing a change. We're seeing this person realize that there's more issues, and maybe almost them seeing that it was others, and finally gaining that self-confidence to say that other people were just as much to blame in those situations. It wasn't always just them like they had thought, and they are gaining that confidence. So before they reach you, before you two are able to become a couple or get together, they really have to think about things. They really have to realize that those negative relationships were just bad moments. It might have just been by chance. Those people, they might have had some negativity in their life, but they always have the choice to bring more positivity into their life. It seems like these mistakes that they made, they're realizing. So when it comes to the stack, what I would say most importantly is the past relationships really impacted them, and this goes for romantic relationships, friendships, family, everything. The way that they just interacted with people seemed to really bring them down. They really lost a lot of self-confidence, and they almost felt like that was a situation that they deserved to be in. Whether or not they actually realized it during those days when they were in those relationships or those years, whatever, they finally are seeing that they're able to see that those relationships were bad now, but they did go through a lot of negativity that impacted them and has left a different sort of negative almost low self-esteem mindset with them. So they still have that, and I would say when this relationship comes along, if you haven't met them yet, there's still something that makes them a little self-conscious about going into a relationship or approaching people, and they still question themselves and question their abilities. But overall, when it comes to those relationships, they really had to sit down and think about everything. They really had to realize what those issues were, what those mistakes were, and how to avoid them. So it seems like with this stack, this person really went through a lot with previous relationships and are sort of turning around and focusing on a new way of looking at things in a more positive way. So when it comes to these relationships, once again, like, I wouldn't really say that these were important relationships. I wouldn't say that these relationships were anything in comparison to the relationship you two will have in the future. It just seems more like this person just had some hardship in the past and is working on being more positive or having more positivity in a future relationship. But they're not any relationships that I would worry about or even bring up or pay attention to. That's what I'm seeing with this second stack and rose quartz. Starting with our third stack and lapis. Our first card is the Tower. Next we have the Seven of Cups, the Fool, and lastly we have Message in a Bottle. So in this stack, it seems like there was one very traumatic relationship and one relationship that they really invested a lot into. With this traumatic relationship, I would say that this ended in a really bad way where it was completely unexpected. And we see the lightning strike this tower, which is completely by chance, right? When lightning hits, we have no way of predicting where it's going to hit. So the fact that it hit this was completely shocking. If we were to like imagine this as a real scenario, it would be completely shocking to see this happen, and probably never going to happen again. So when it came to that relationship, I think they invested a lot in it, or they thought a lot about it, and then it sort of fell apart out of nowhere, and they don't know what happened to it. And to this day, they probably still have no idea how it got to the point it did and then fell apart. It seemed like it was just not meant to be, and it came to a sort of crashing end. And I would say, because of the way that relationship ended and how unexpected it was and unprepared they were, when they went into the next relationship or the next person came along, they saw this person as being like amazing. This next person, or the second relationship, was just this really big to do. They really just thought the world of this person, thought like they were handed everything they could have ever wanted. This person was, in their mind, perfect. But we see it followed by the Fool card. And if we pay attention to the Seven of Cups card, we see almost like what's too good to be true. We see a lot of doors, a lot of options, a lot of greatness, but we don't really know what's behind those doors. We don't know if those things are real, and we don't know whether or not there's like a different interpretation of what's behind those doors. But also having the Fool next to it, we're seeing that this was a mistake or an error on their part, where because they were so caught up in the surprising end of this relationship, they went in blindly to the next relationship, not realizing what issues were present, not realizing that they were too happy about it. Like, this was something that they were just throwing themselves into, and everything was going to be perfect, not realizing that of course it wasn't going to be perfect. There would always be flaws and issues present. But the second relationship was really something big to them, and big in a way where they put so much into it, and they invested so much into it that they didn't realize what they were doing. They didn't realize that this relationship was not going to work out, and that this wasn't a real relationship. It was almost like a fun, youthful relationship that everybody says is not serious, but the people that are in the relationship don't realize what those people mean by it's not serious. Like, it's a fling, it's something fun, it's something temporary. And once the fun dies down, there's nothing that's a base to hold it together. There's no real foundation to start with. So it might be fun, like you have a couple things in common, but it's nothing to build a relationship out of. And they didn't see that during this relationship. They just dove headfirst into it, hoping for the best. They were just so almost desperate for another relationship, and almost desperate to sort of have what they had planned with this person. So they went into this relationship trying to replicate the previous one, trying to plan out this relationship that would never be able to work. But they didn't notice that it wasn't going to work. They just kept going, and we really see that in this Fool card, that although we wouldn't say that they were dumb, we wouldn't say they were stupid, it was just something that they were so happy with, and almost in a euphoric way, where they were so pleased with the situation that they finally found somebody. They were so blinded by the events of the previous relationship, they didn't see the warning signs that were coming up, and they didn't see that the way they were progressing was not right. Like, it wasn't going to be the relationship that they had planned to begin with. So it was just a lot of just throwing themselves in, even with this relationship, even seeing. And I would say that they did see that there were issues, but they ignored them because they didn't want that relationship to end up the way that first relationship ended. But I would say that that's really all I'm seeing with this stack with two relationships. I want to say there were many relationships, and I would say that it seemed like that first relationship was more when they were sort of younger and more naive, or more not understanding of serious relationships. And then this one came off or on a little later, where they were more aware of serious relationships, but still weren't understanding the situation. When we see Message in a Bottle coming along, I would say that that's when that relationship came to an end, and there was probably a moment where they had to sit down and realize that they made some mistakes, and maybe that relationship really wasn't this fantastic thing that they were making it out to be, and maybe they really did need to slow down and evaluate what they were doing before they got in too deep. But with Message in a Bottle, I would say that there was a notice, there was something that came up that made them realize that they needed to approach relationships in different ways than they were in the past, that those two relationships were just whatever they were during the time that they were just moments in time. They weren't meant to be that permanent relationship that they'll have with you. And I would say it's probably like somebody telling them, or something that showed them that there was more to a relationship than what they had created in their head. When it comes to that relationship, I would say this first relationship, even though they still can't understand what went wrong with it, I would say it doesn't seem to be that big of a deal. I would say like they're still desperate for the person. They still want to go back to them. That is not the case with this. And this one, I don't think it was ever real. So I would say that that's not something to worry about. I would say that both of those relationships were something that would help solidify the relationship with you. They will know that it's real, know that they're not just jumping onto it, thinking that this is going to be another fun thing. They will know that this relationship is real when you come on. So that's what I'm seeing with this third stack and last. It's definitely not the best relationships in the past. Starting with our last stack and adventuring. Our first card is the Four of Swords. Next we have the Ten of Cups. We have Temperance. And lastly, Come to the Edge. It's a really interesting combination of relationships and cards here. We see quite a bit going on where a lot of scenarios could have taken place, and I don't know whether it's many relationships or just them going through one, sort of like the way that they started off, where it didn't seem like it was going to work out, but then it sort of progressed to where it did work out, but it has a lot of things that are coming up. So we have this first card here with the Four of Wands. It's a pretty peaceful card, even though we see this person laying there, right? They're it could be a tomb, it could be like a person's coffin, it could be a person just laying there, whatever we want to interpret the card in this stack. Whatever it is, it's not a scary situation, right? The swords are on the wall. There's a sword underneath him, but there's nothing that is creating a violence or any sort of fear in this card. And it's actually very pretty scenery. We know that they're inside of a church. So this is something very peaceful and calm. And then we see the Ten of Cups come along with this like sort of party going on. We know the Ten of Cups is a very positive card, one that really screams like long-lasting relationship. So to go from this peaceful place into this card, it seems like there's quite a jump because we're not seeing anything in between that. We're not seeing what can be interpreted as a journey or as growth here. So it seems like this person sort of started off not really paying attention to relationships. They almost didn't really plan on being in a relationship at any point in their life. They were just going through and letting things happen when they happened, not really hoping or being like on the lookout for things that were coming. They knew where they were at, and I was going to say that they were probably more focused on getting to where they needed to be, maybe like finishing school, getting a good job, doing things that were important. And then all those things sort of came into place where they were good and they were happy. And then they met this person, and I don't know if this is their first relationship or whatever it was, second, third, whatever. Whenever they met this person, things sort of like blindsided them. They sort of got so absorbed in the relationship, things started going fast, and they weren't really thinking about what the relationship was. It was just sort of like, let's just keep going, like let's just keep running forward, not stopping no matter what happens. Let's just head out. And it seemed like a really good, positive relationship, and everything was really good in that relationship. Everything was happy, everything was pleasant, and I wouldn't say that there was anything bad about it. It did seem like it was a very good relationship. But when we see Temperance coming in, I would say that it seems more like this relationship was sort of just a relationship, not anything that was meant to last long. And I don't think that either person in that relationship had planned on it lasting long. And the way I want to explain it is, they were both in that relationship thinking, well, we'll be in this relationship for the time that the universe allows us to be in this relationship. Almost as if both of them knew that it wasn't going to be a long relationship. Like they both knew that it was temporary. They both seemed like they were just going to run with happiness while they had each other. But when the end came, it was the end. And that's where I think temperance comes in, because temperance is that sort of balance, that looking at society, looking at the world, looking at the relationships, looking at anything, and just knowing where things are supposed to be, knowing where they're supposed to be placed in life. And I think they came to a point where they realized that they were reaching that point where they just weren't supposed to be together anymore. And they both came to that end. And it sort of seems like it seemed like it wasn't serious to others. And I think it almost seemed like it wasn't serious to them, but I think the way that they handled that relationship was both like they wanted a good relationship, so they knew what they wanted in the future, but not necessarily that they wanted each other in the future. And when it comes to you, and when you look back on this relationship, if they ever bring up this relationship, or if you hear of this person, if they're friends with this person, know that this is not an issue. This relationship was not an issue, because they knew what their time was. They knew that their time came to an end, and they knew that they needed to move forward. We see this come to the edge card here, with this person standing on the edge of this little floating rock here, and they could fall off, or a lot of things could happen. But we do see hearts here, a lot of hearts going around here. And I would say that they both realized that that's where they needed to separate. That's where they needed to just call it quits. They were both happy. They both knew where they were going in life. And I'm sure that this other person has also moved on to a better relationship. So when it comes to this relationship, I would say it doesn't really seem like they had a lot of relationships. And I would say they might have been together for like quite a few years with this stack. But when it comes to this stack specifically, I would say that this relationship is not something that you need to be worried about. And it's not something that you need to really dwell on or think about. Even if they're friends with them, I would say don't worry, because the way that they are, the place that they're both at, they've really successfully moved forward, and they have no desire to be with the other person, because they knew that that relationship was purely temporary. They had fun when they were together, and they both knew when it was time to come to an end. So that's what I'm seeing with this final stack and adventuring. It seemed like it was just that one relationship that was almost serious, but they both knew that there was no longevity to it. So those are all the stacks that I have for you all today. I hope you were able to find a stack that resonated or provided you with information. I want to thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to watch this video. If there are any questions you'd like asked in a future pick a card video, feel free to leave them in the comment section. I hope you all are doing well and staying safe. Please stay healthy, everyone. Have a wonderful day, week, and year. Bye-bye.